Burmese pythons have transformed the entire ecosystem of South Florida. After arriving here as seemingly innocent pets, these snakes have overrun their new environment in just a few decades. Florida's wild heart has always beaten in entangled swamps and sunlit forests, where predators and prey danced a delicate ballet for centuries. But when a silent invasion began in the shadows, the entire landscape shifted. But one invasive predator changed everything: the Burmese python. Since the 1980s, this uninvited predator has run rampant through this brutal stretch of swamps, sawgrass, and mangroves. Native creatures vanished, panic spread, and the natural order seemed to collapse. As experts scrambled for answers, Florida's next move left the world in disbelief. Many species of reptile have been introduced to Florida before, but none have taken over quite like the Burmese python has. Was the government really trying to solve this issue by releasing hundreds of rare snake killers in its ecosystem? And yet, a decision mocked by millions became the state's last hope. This is the story of an audacious experiment that changed the very meaning of survival. The snake invasion nobody saw coming. Florida in the early 20th century was a place of wild abundance. Tangled mangrove coastlines, endless sawgrass prairies, cypress swamps humming with insects and alive with the flicker of animal life. Into this ancient landscape came an uninvited guest, carried across oceans not as a harbinger of ruin, but as a novelty. In the 1930s, Burmese pythons, monsters of the jungle, were imported from the forests of Southeast Asia, destined for the glass tanks and living rooms of exotic animal enthusiasts. People marveled at their shifting patterns and enormous strength, rarely questioning the wisdom of taming the wild. For a time, they were little more than curiosities, photographed and paraded at carnivals or traded between collectors. But some soon realized the reality of owning a creature that could grow to 20 feet and squeeze the life from a goat. Some owners, unable or unwilling to care for these titans, simply released them. Hurricanes, accidents, and neglect set others loose. The Everglades, with its warm winters, flooded sloughs, and endless supply of prey, offered sanctuary beyond anything the snakes could have known in their native home. Unseen and unopposed, the pythons multiplied. Their eggs, laid deep in the marsh or beneath rotting logs, hatched in secret. Hatchlings grew quickly, feeding on everything from lizards to baby rabbits. As the years slipped by, their numbers swelled. By the turn of the new millennium, the Everglades and the tangled wilds around it were no longer just the domain of alligators and herons. The python had arrived, and it brought with it an insatiable hunger. It did not take long for the signs to become unmistakable. Marsh rabbits vanished, their tracks erased from the muddy banks. Raccoons and opossums, once so abundant they bordered on pests, seemed to disappear into thin air. The silent glide of a python through shallow water became a death sentence for anything too slow to escape its embrace. The swamps of Florida were transformed. Where once there was a riot of bird song and mammalian chatter, there was now a hollow quiet, the ghosts of missing animals haunting the reed-choked channels. The invasion was invisible at first, but soon the damage was everywhere. Hunters, biologists, and locals reported finding fewer and fewer animals. The pythons, apex predators without rival or limitation, coiled themselves around the heart of the ecosystem and squeezed. With every vanished species, Florida lost a piece of its soul. The invasion had begun, and the outcome was already tipping. Florida was losing. Vanishing wildlife. The numbers that emerged in the early 21st century were not merely alarming, they were apocalyptic. From 2003 to 2011, a series of landmark studies sent shockwaves through the conservation world. In vast swaths of southern Florida, The raccoon, a creature known for its cunning and adaptability, had been reduced by more than 99% wherever pythons had taken hold. Opossums, famed for their resilience and resourcefulness, were almost entirely erased. Their decline measured at 98.9%. Bobcats, silent hunters of the underbrush, had declined by nearly 90%. Marsh rabbits, foxes, even deer calves, all gone. Their fates entwined with the relentless rise of the python. This was not a slow fade into obscurity. It was the abrupt collapse of an entire food web. Each missing mammal created new gaps, ripple effects that shattered balances developed over millennia. With fewer prey animals, hawks and owls struggled. The seeds these mammals once spread lay dormant, changing the very shape of the landscape. Predators that once controlled disease-carrying rodents vanished, leaving humans exposed to new threats. But the nightmare did not end with the python. Florida's native venomous snakes, pit vipers, and coral snakes found themselves unchecked, thriving in an ecosystem thrown out of rhythm. They moved into territories abandoned by vanished mammals. With their populations unregulated, encounters with people, pets, and livestock became frequent and dangerous. Emergency rooms across the state filled with victims suffering the agony of venom, each bite a reminder of a natural order gone awry. To scientists, the message was clear. The system was collapsing under the weight of its missing parts. The Everglades, once described as one of the most intricate and biologically rich environments on Earth, now teetered on the brink. In newsrooms and living rooms among rangers, farmers, and city dwellers, the phrase began to circulate like a grim prophecy. It's over. The balance was gone, and with it perhaps any hope of turning the tide. The mockery begins. Against this backdrop of catastrophe, a new announcement crackled through headlines and television broadcasts, igniting equal measures of hope and ridicule. In a move that bordered on the surreal, Florida's wildlife authorities unveiled a plan as daring as it was unexpected. The answer to the python crisis and the unchecked surge of venomous native snakes would be more snakes. But not just any snakes. The state would release hundreds of eastern indigo snakes, a species long vanished from much of its range and officially declared endangered decades before. The proposal landed like a thunderclap. Journalists and talk show hosts seized on the absurdity. "Florida to fight snakes with snakes," blared one headline. Editorials lampooned the idea as a sign of bureaucratic madness or a last flailing gasp of failed conservation. On social media, the story mutated into a viral spectacle. Users created memes poking fun at a state seemingly obsessed with snakes, as if the government planned to solve every problem by doubling down on chaos. Only Florida, the world seemed to agree, would try to dig itself out of a snake pit by throwing in more snakes. The public laughed, shrugged, and dismissed the plan as an act of desperation dressed in scientific jargon. It was easier to mock than to understand. But beneath the layers of scorn and disbelief, something real was taking shape. The plan was not born out of panic, but out of a deep understanding of what had been lost and what could still be restored. The eastern indigo snake was not just another reptile. It was a missing keystone, a natural predator of venomous snakes, a gentle giant whose presence once kept ecosystems in check. While the world jeered, a handful of biologists, conservationists, and visionaries began quietly working to bring back a balance that once defined Florida's wild places. What sounded like the punchline to a bad joke was in fact the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test the limits of ridicule and reveal with time the true power of nature's own design. The rare killer. The eastern indigo snake moved with a silent authority across the wild heart of the American Southeast. It was no ordinary reptile, but a legend that came to life. longer than any of its kind. With bodies reaching beyond 8 feet, its scales shimmered with a blue-black brilliance, absorbing sunlight, reflecting just enough to hint at something regal. While its cousins relied on venom, quick, invisible, and deadly, the indigo brought a different kind of power into the world. Its gift was not a toxin, but a patient, muscular strength and an almost mythic immunity to poison. To most creatures in the woods and marshes, the indigo was an enigma. It didn't threaten people. In fact, it moved unseen through the undergrowth, fleeing from the vibration of human footsteps. But to the other snakes, rattlesnakes, copperheads, coral snakes, pit vipers, it was a terror. The indigo had no fear of warning rattles or striped red and yellow rings. It hunted its venomous cousins with relentless confidence, overpowering them, resisting their bites, and swallowing them whole. Where most creatures shrank back at the sound of a rattle, the indigo advanced, a living contradiction to the laws of nature, a biological weapon crafted by evolution to restore a precarious balance. The forests, swamps, and sandy ridges of the South once belonged to it, from the pine savannas of South Carolina down to the tangled wilderness of Florida. This very snake, so perfectly designed to keep chaos in check, nearly vanished because of the same species it never threatened: humans. The relentless march of logging saw 90 million acres of longleaf pine disappear, carved up for timber and farmland, until just fragments remained. Each patch of forest lost was another blow to the indigo, robbing it of the underground burrows and shaded cover where it bred and hid. Asphalt roads cut through the remnants. Each new highway a gauntlet of death where adult indigos died in futile attempts to cross between shrinking refuges. Then came the pet trade, a new threat as devastating as the axe or the tire. The indigo's glossy beauty and gentle temperament made it irresistible to collectors. Thousands were allegedly taken from the wild, leaving behind only silence and empty tunnels. And in a tragic irony, rattlesnake eradication campaigns meant to protect humans from venom relied on methods that slaughtered the indigos as well. By the closing years of the 20th century, the reality was impossible to ignore. Whole populations vanished. Once healthy gene pools became fragile and thin. The indigo, which had once kept venomous snakes in check and preserved an ancient balance, was now reduced to a shadow. The forests had gone silent. Reintroduction gamble. Even in the final act, the story of the indigo snake was not ready to end. Florida, the last stronghold of the species, refused to accept oblivion as a fate. In 2017, hope emerged from the most unlikely of places: laboratories, conservation centers, and the unwavering dedication of people who still believed nature could heal. At the Orion Center for Indigo Conservation, in a facility ringed by wire and forest, a handful of indigo eggs began to hatch. Here, conservationists took on the delicate work of giving the species a second chance. Each snake was raised with the utmost care, fed and protected until it grew strong enough to face the challenges of the wild. For 2 years, the young indigos lived behind glass and mesh, shielded from predators and disease, their strength building in secret. When the time was right, biologists prepared for the next phase, a return to freedom. This was not an act of desperation, but of precision. The Apalachicola bluffs and ravines preserve, a rare and fiercely protected sliver of longleaf pine, was chosen as the release site. The work was meticulous. Each snake was tagged, tracked, and its health monitored. In 2024 alone, 41 indigos, 22 females, and 19 males were carried to the sanctuary, their cool bodies slipping from gentle hands into sunlit grass. Over the years, the number grew to more than 200, each one a living promise slid back into the world they once ruled. But hope was shadowed by doubt. Could a few hundred snakes, no matter how carefully bred and released, really undo a century of damage? Could they restore balance to an ecosystem so battered and fragmented? Or was this only a noble gesture destined to fade like so many before it? Nature fights back. For decades, skepticism lingered like a low mist over Florida's wildlands. Biologists and locals alike wondered if the reintroduced snakes would simply vanish, overwhelmed by the same forces that nearly destroyed them. But the indigo snake, forged by evolution to survive among dangers, was not so easily erased. Once set loose, the indigos wasted no time reclaiming their ancient role. Their return did not echo with fanfare, but with silent essential work: hunting, patrolling, and restoring. In places where venomous snakes had bred unchecked, indigos re-emerged as regulators, hunting rattlesnakes and copperheads, subduing coral snakes and feasting on cottonmouths. Their presence was felt in the change of rhythms, the slow shift from fear to equilibrium. Farmers noticed fewer venomous snakes in their fields. Children who once feared stepping outside could breathe a little easier. The indigo's appetite extended beyond snakes. They hunted rodents, including the cotton rat, a creature whose numbers had swelled unchecked, ravaging crops and spreading diseases like the Black Creek Canal virus. With each indigo that slid into a burrow or across a field, the pulse of nature's balance quickened. The real surprise came when researchers discovered that indigos also preyed on young Burmese pythons. These invasive giants, once hatched, threatened to overwhelm Florida's ecosystem with unchecked growth. But indigos, immune to their small early bites, snatched them from the food web before they could become monsters. For the first time in decades, there was an answer to ecological chaos, one not invented by man, but restored by him. Florida was not merely fighting snakes with snakes, it was bringing back a keystone species, one that nature itself had selected over millennia to hold the line against imbalance. The indigo snake, once nearly lost, had returned as a symbol of resilience and the quiet, ongoing battle to set things right. Signs of success. The path to revival was defined by doubt and waiting. For years, those working to reintroduce the eastern indigo snake into Florida's wilds measured their progress in whispers of hope rather than headlines. At first, survival was the only sign that the plan was working. Released snakes were spotted from time to time, slipping through grass and palmetto, but nothing more. It was not enough. For the project to truly succeed, there had to be evidence that the indigos were not simply clinging to life, but were laying down new roots in their ancestral home. Without proof of wild-born offspring, real second-generation hatchlings, there could be no claim of victory, only a holding pattern against extinction. The waiting ended in 2023. Deep in the North Florida landscape, biologists allegedly discovered something they had scarcely allowed themselves to imagine: 2 wild indigo hatchlings. They had never seen them here in more than 40 years. These were not snakes from the laboratory or the nursery, but young, newly born, the direct descendants of parents released as part of the experiment so many had mocked. The news ran through the scientific community with electric speed. The moment was more than symbolic. It was a turning point. No longer could anyone claim the project was a gamble that hadn't paid off. It was the end of defeatism, the close of an era in which Florida's ecosystems were left to unravel. In its place dawned a new chapter, one marked by recovery, renewal, and the return of an ancient guardian. The age of watching, powerless as native species vanished, had ended. Now there was a new story to tell. Beyond Florida, the ripple of triumph didn't stop at Florida's borders. Across state lines, the story of the indigo snake inspired a wave of hope and determination. In Alabama, conservationists studied Florida's success and asked, could it happen here? The answer, they decided, was yes. Soon hundreds of indigos were allegedly released into the Kuneku National Forest, each one a living wager that the landscape could heal. For years, researchers kept watch, searching for the one sign that mattered most. A wild-born native indigo snake wriggling through the leaf litter proved that restoration was not just possible, but already underway. The dream was no longer local, it had become regional. It was not just Florida reclaiming a piece of its wild soul. It was the entire southeastern United States reimagining its natural future. But the story stretched beyond snakes. The eastern indigo's fate was bound to that of the gopher tortoise, a keystone species whose burrows served as sanctuaries for hundreds of other animals. Every effort to protect or restore the tortoise was an effort to help the indigo snake, and vice versa. Conservationists learned that to save one species, they had to save the world in which it lived. That meant restoring the longleaf pine forests, once dominant, now a shadow of their former selves, that had shaped the lives of snakes, tortoises, birds, and insects for millennia. Florida's plan, ridiculed at its outset, had grown into a movement. Conservation was no longer something debated in reports and roundtables. It was boots in the mud, hands in the soil, and new life emerging where extinction once threatened to take hold. The revival was real, and it was spreading, from mockery to model. Step into Florida's forest today, and you will find more than 200 indigo snakes coiling through the underbrush, shining blue-black in dappled sunlight. This is not the story of a failed experiment, but the reality of a thriving ecosystem. The indigos, once written off as relics of a vanished age, now serve as stewards of the land. They do what nature designed them to do: check the rise of venomous snakes, limit populations of destructive rodents, and remarkably even prey on the young of the invasive Burmese python, helping to stem the tide of an ecological crisis. To humans, the indigo snake is harmless, shy, and uninterested in confrontation. Yet its presence is vital, a living indicator that the land itself is on the mend. When an ecosystem is working as it should, the indigo snake is there. Its scales, dark, iridescent, almost otherworldly, have become a symbol not just of what was saved, but of what is possible. The project that began with laughter, skepticism, and scorn has transformed into a blueprint for ecological recovery. Land managers, scientists, and conservationists across the country now look to Florida's example when designing their own rewilding efforts. What was once the subject of ridicule is now a model for how even the most ambitious conservation dreams can be realized with vision, persistence, and science. The story that began with mockery closes with vindication. Florida was mocked for releasing hundreds of rare snake killers. The result changed their minds. Florida's gamble has become nature's answer. Proof that the boldest ideas, those that seem reckless, naive, or doomed, are sometimes exactly what the earth needs. Those who declared "it's over" had misunderstood the meaning of the phrase. For the indigo snake, for the forests of Florida, and for every ecosystem fighting to recover, it is not over. It is only the beginning. Was the gamble to restore Florida's balance the stroke of genius the world needed, or the start of something even bigger? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and catch you in the next one.